A very warm welcome to the new episode of Ink and Insights. This is your host, Sumit Sharma Samir. This is a Nepal based podcast, and if you are interested in listening to the thought leaders from around the world, as well as Nepali entrepreneurs, please subscribe to my channel. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Eric Weiner in my program today. Eric Weiner is an acclaimed American author, journalist, and speaker, renowned for his insightful explorations of culture, happiness, and philosophy. His work seamlessly blends travel writing with deep philosophical inquiry, offering readers a unique perspective on the human experience. During his 30-year career as a journalist, he worked for National Public Radio and reported from more than 30 nations, from Iraq to Indonesia, covering some of the major international events of recent times. He is the recipient of several journalism awards, including the Angel Award for coverage of Islamic affairs in Asia. Weiner's first book, The Geography of Bliss, won Grumm's Search for the Happiest Places in the World, which was published in 2008, was a New York Times bestseller and has been translated into 20 languages. Weiner is also the recipient of the Borders Original Voices Award and a finalist for the Barnes and Novel Discover Award. His second book, Man Seeks God, My Flirtations with the Divine, was widely praised for its fresh, often humorous take on spiritual seeking. His latest book, Ben and Me in Search of a Founder's Formula for a Long and Useful Life, was just published by Simon and Schuster in May 2024. Eric is also a regular commentator for NPR's All Things Considered and a frequent contributor to the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and other publications. He also visits Nepal quite often. Eric, welcome to Ink and Insights with Sumit Sharma Samir.
Namaste, Sumit. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Namaste. Eric, you just returned from your trip to Nepal. How often you visit us?
At least once a year, but so far this year, I've already been there 3 times. So I would say 1 to 3 times per year. Sometimes it's a jumping off point to Bhutan or Delhi, and sometimes I'm just staying in Nepal. But you're right, I am a regular visitor.
Right. And when did this relationship with Nepal started?
Oh boy. All the way back in 1993 was the first. It
Wow.
was the first place in Asia I'd ever been to. I was young. I was on my way to New Delhi to take up a new posting as South Asia bureau chief for NPR, and I had arranged actually through the U.S. government in the State Department to teach a course on business journalism of all things in Kathmandu, and. And I arrived, and at the time I did not know about the 15-minute time difference of Nepal and the rest of the world. So I
Okay.
was confused. I was in my hotel and I was watching BBC News headlines, and it was always coming at 15 minutes past the hour. And I thought, well, why is the BBC have the news headlines at 15 minutes past the hour? And then I realized that the BBC was at the top of the hour. It was Nepal that was off by 15 minutes. So. Uh,
Right.
so I think that was my first trip, and then many years went by. I think before I came back and was researching my book "Man Seeks God" that you just mentioned, and I met my friend James Hopkins, who I believe was a previous guest on your show, and
Yeah.
I met him, interviewed him for my book. We became friends, and we became partners in the Himalayan Writers Workshop, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Right. Right. And Eric, what is it about Nepal that keeps drawing you back intellectually or spiritually?
Um, I should add that one of my friends is Manjushri Thapa, who I think you may know, the writer. And I think she kind of epitomizes the, intellectual streak that Nepalis have. She's an excellent writer. She's living in Canada now. And I met her, and I know her husband as well. That's a tough question. I would have to say, with all due respect to Nepal, it's really South Asia in general. India, Nepal. I have this weird accomplishment, I guess you can call it. You know about the SAARC nations,
Mhm.
SAARC. Well, I've been to
Yeah.
all of them. I've been to all of them, including the Maldives.
Right.
And so I feel like I should be an honorary SAARC member, perhaps. I should get some sort. I shouldn't have to pay the foreigner rate to visit the sites in Kathmandu. Um, so it's South Asia in general, but On this recent trip, and I may get in trouble with my Indian friends for saying this, but I was sort of going back and forth. I started in Kathmandu, went to Bhutan, went to India, to Delhi and Dehradun, then back to Kathmandu. Um, as much as Kathmandu is a huge city, and as you know, some things work, a lot of things do not work, and traffic is awful, et cetera, et cetera. I find it to be a softer and easier place to work and live in, to navigate than a city like Delhi or Mumbai. I think the Nepalese, even in the capital city, have a softness to them
Hmm.
that, especially in North India, you don't always see. There's more of a harshness in the culture and the people there. Partly
Hmm.
maybe it's out of necessity. There are just so many Indians, 1.5 billion. There are far fewer Nepalese. But there's a sense of humor and a playfulness, and I guess that word softness comes to mind in a good way.
Right.
I find that the Nepalis are easy to talk to. They're open. Um, yeah, I find my blood pressure lowers when I reach Nepal if I'm coming from, say, India or Pakistan or someplace else.
Eric, you began your career as a foreign correspondent for NPR. What were some of the most defining moments in your journalism journey?
Well, certainly the day I arrived in New Delhi in December of 1993, after my 2 weeks teaching the course in Nepal, the day before my flight to Delhi, I got very sick and a fever.
Oh, no.
And so I flew to Delhi in a kind of delirium, which is maybe the best way to fly to Delhi. I don't know. I was delirious with, I don't know what it is in Celsius, but in Fahrenheit, it was like 104 degrees. So quite high fever. And I remember just being disoriented and arriving in Delhi and going to my hotel. And it really began my career as a foreign correspondent. I had other postings in Jerusalem and Tokyo, but my first love is still South Asia,
Mm.
and I just found myself drawn to that part of the world. So that was just arriving and setting up this bureau was quite an adventure. And I covered other big stories. I covered the rise of the Taliban, the fall of the Taliban, the rise of the Taliban again in Afghanistan. I've interviewed Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan and covered wars in Iraq and in East Timor, in Afghanistan, conflicts in Sudan. But I mentioned those, but to be perfectly honest, Sumit, I've never been a war correspondent. At least that's not what what I really enjoyed. Some journalists really, maybe enjoy is not the right word, but they get an adrenaline rush from being in the
Right.
middle of a war zone. War zone. I'm much more of a coward, I have to be honest, and I was always much more interested in the feature stories, what we call good news stories. What is India, Nepal, Pakistan back? What are they doing differently? How are they solving these universal problems, like how to hold a free and fair election, how to deliver health care? You might be familiar with the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I early on, way before he was prime minister, before he won the Nobel Prize, I interviewed Muhammad Yunus at the bank in Dhaka, and that's an example of the kind of story I really enjoyed. Not flashy, not front page news, but here's this bank in Bangladesh that's lending money to women, and the women pay it back, and microloans, this whole idea of microloans. I found that fascinating because here it is, this extremely poor country, Bangladesh, coming up with very innovative solutions to really universal problems. How do you help poor people, better their lives? And those are the kinds of stories that I love doing. And we can talk about this, but that's how I, ultimately made my transition from daily journalist to full-time author, which is what I do now.
Yeah, yeah. So I was about to ask questions related to that as well. Eric, you have reported from more than 30 countries.
Sure.
And how did that experience shape your worldview and later inspire your books?
Well, the thing about being a foreign correspondent, Sumit, is you tend to focus as all journalists do, to be honest, on bad news, right? There's a very cynical expression among journalists here in the U.S. If it bleeds, it leads. It means leads
Oh,
the news. Very cynical, but kind of true. To say, you know, Sumit Sharma had a peaceful dinner in Kathmandu, that's not news, you know. But Sumit Sharma, you know, joins rebellion in Nepal, whatever that is news. So that, like, in
yeah,
other words, bad news is news.
true.
And as I said, the Grameen Bank stories, the good news stories, were things I almost had to do in my spare time when I wasn't covering bad news. So
Mm,
in a way, being a foreign correspondent exposes you. Well, to be honest, I would say, especially in a place like South Asia, it exposes you to the best and the worst of humanity.
true.
I think you can stand on any street corner in New Delhi or in Kathmandu or in Dhaka or Colombo and turn around 360 degrees, and you will see the best and worst in humanity. You'll see someone, cheating someone else. You'll see a beggar. Then you'll see someone helping the beggar. You'll be seeing someone committing an act of great kindness, being
Yeah.
kind to a dog on the streets of Bodhanath in Kathmandu. So I would say being a foreign correspondent, especially in South Asia, exposed me to the just enormous range of humanity, the good and the bad. And I found it fascinating, and I still find it fascinating. It's just a lot more interesting than up until recently, our kind of boring life in the U.S., where you go to shopping malls and that sort of thing. So, you take it for granted living in Kathmandu, but every day you walk out on the street in Kathmandu, you're going to see something fascinating.
True.
And so that it really fired up my imagination. I felt more alive living overseas in these places. I felt I had a real purpose. It was hard coming back home,
Yeah.
becoming just sort of another American living now I'm living in just outside of Washington, D.C. So I've been fortunate that I keep going back on these missions, really. We can talk about that. But I always travel with a purpose. I'm not much of a tourist or a vacationer. I need a purpose when I travel.
Right. Right. And what differentiates good traveling writing from great journalism? And how do you
Mm,
merge the two in your work?
that's a really good question. So I began to notice something. So I would go off on a 2-week trip to, say, Kabul, and I would file a bunch of stories, and they would be broadcast in the U.S. And my friends would hear them back in New York, California, wherever, and they'd write to me and say, "Oh, Eric, I heard your story from Afghanistan. It was very interesting, but what's it really like in Kabul? What's it really like in Afghanistan?" And I thought, well, geez, my report should convey what it's really like.
I know.
But that's the problem, is journalism has this sort of model where you don't get personal. Okay, so here's one of the differences: is
Right.
basically that in travel writing, and I'm talking about good travel writing, not the sort of fluffy, how to find the best deal at Chitwan Park or whatever, but really, the kind that Paul Theroux, Pico Iyer, my sort of heroes as I was growing up, these writers who really conveyed a sense of place. So you don't get an email or a letter saying what's it really like in Kathmandu or wherever. You're conveying that. In a way, you're sort
Right.
of all the conversations that journalists have at the bar after they filed their story. That's the stuff you're putting in the book. So it has a sense of verisimilitude, of truthiness, and
Mhm.
also it's personal, right? Journalists are not supposed to insert themselves into the story. As a travel writer now, that's what I do. I mean, it is. I can go to Nama Buddha and say I like it or I don't like it. I can give my
Yeah.
opinion. I can meet Sumit. I can say I don't like Sumit. I do like Sumit. I mean, I do like
Yeah.
Sumit, but I can give my opinion,
True.
and that was very liberating when I started writing books. And not all journalists can do it. They sort of carry their journalistic cautiousness, I would say,
Mhm.
and distance from their subject into the books. But I kind of just took to it like a duck to water because I think I found my true calling. As a correspondent for NPR, I had what I called the almost perfect job. And those are tricky. Those are hard to leave. If you got a terrible job, you're really motivated to leave. But I had a very good job. I was traveling the world, covering all these stories, but it was the almost perfect job. And what I do
Right.
now, writing these books, talking about them, having conversations with fascinating people like you, this is the perfect job for me.
तिमीसँग अब धेरै टाइम छैन है बिहे गर्नु छ भने गरिहाल नत्र घरबाट मलाई अन्तै बिहे गर्दिनु
भर्खर 3 वर्ष भयो एमबीबीएस जोइन गरेको 5 वर्षको कोर्स हो के भो अचम्म छ एक्सक्युज मी सर मेरो 5 वर्षको कोर्स 3 वर्षमा सकाउन मिल्दैन
Get out.
हेलो
के सोच्यो त
के सोच्ने मैले प्रिन्सिपलसँग पनि कुरा गरिसके 3 वर्षमा पनि के हुन्छ 3 वर्षमा
के भयो भाइ ल बस साउजी एक कप चिया कसले भन्यो 3 वर्षमा केही हुँदैन भनेर यो हेर एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजनामा 3 वर्षमा पैसा फिर्ता हुन्छ
ए हो र
जीवन बीमाको साथमा धनवृष्टि 3 वर्षमा एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजना एलआईसी नेपाल
Warm services to delight your senses, taking hospitality to newer heights. Nepal Airlines.
Eric, and your books, I mean, I've read some reviews, often explore happiness, genius, and philosophy through geography. What led you to start writing the geography of bliss?
So, as I said, I was, feeling like I had this almost perfect job. And I realized I had this epiphany, what if instead of traveling the world reporting on the least happy people in the least happy places, refugees, victims of disease, famine, what if I spent a year traveling the world to the happiest places or looking for the happiest places? Mm-hmm. What could I learn from these places? What could the audience learn? And I presented this idea to the foreign editor at NPR, and he did not go for it because that's not what journalists do. So then I thought, well, maybe this is a book. And I put together a proposal, found myself a literary agent, and got very lucky. We sold the idea and the book proposal very quickly into a wonderful editor and publisher now, named Jonathan Karp, now CEO of Simon & Schuster, the big publishing company. And I think he recognized that, at the time, this is 2006, 2007, there were these wave of books about the science of happiness were coming out and how to be happy. And they were about what makes you happy, who's happy. And I come in and say, no, let's look at where is happiness. And so it was riding the wave at the right time. I'd like to think it was a good book. I'm told it is. I put my heart and soul into it. And I was surprised by the success. But it was a good surprise. And I quickly, after that, decided this is what I want to do. I want to write these books. And look, I've written 5, and they've not been equally successful by any means. There have been ups and downs, but we can talk about this later. But this is the thing: is you have, if you're going to be an artist or a writer, you've got to love the work and not the results. That's
from Socrates to Confucius, the other work, the Socrates Express, brings philosophers to life. What inspired this philosophical traveler?
Well, I had always been interested in philosophy, but never really dove in. We all wish we had a time machine to go back, maybe go back to university days and be a better student. I would have been a philosophy or a history major instead of English literature. That's, I would have. And maybe you would have made some changes if you had that time machine, to go back. And so I needed to scratch that itch. And also it struck me that philosophy gets a bad rap these days. It's seen as something very difficult, like mathematics with words, something that makes your head hurt, something that's very impractical, And really, if you go back to the root meaning of the word philosophy from the ancient Greek philosophia, it means lover of wisdom, a love of wisdom, and a philosopher is someone who loves wisdom. And we're really hungry for wisdom. I mean, we have in our palm of our hands with smartphones, we have all this information, right? And really all of human knowledge, literally in the palm of our hands. But are we happier? Are we wiser? It's really wisdom that we wanted. And so I thought philosophy, unlike, say, science or religion, was a really untapped source of wisdom. And so I tried to, in these 14 philosophers I profiled, and I journeyed around the world on trains, I wanted to bring them down to earth to show how they actually can help you be happier, wiser, smarter, all these things.
Right. Right. And can you please tell us about your recent work, Ben and Me, that was published on 2024?
Yeah, this was a bit different. Here I was coming home writing about an American. The truth is, I've always felt more comfortable writing about, Gandhi or Confucius, some foreign figure. I just always been drawn to that. But through a various serendipitous circumstances, Ben Franklin kept popping up, in my life. I'm in a carpet shop in Kabul, and I go to buy a carpet, and I take out, they want US dollars there. They don't want Afghanis. And so I take out 10s and 20s from my money belt, and the dealer, the salesman says, no, only Franklins. He wanted, Ben Franklin is on the $100 bill. And a fun fact is 70% of those bills circulate outside the U.S. There are more $100 bills outside the U.S. than inside the U.S. And it's sort of like has been the currency, that $100 bill. So there's Franklin's face, and this carpet dealer in Kabul knows him. And then during the pandemic, I thought, well, I can't travel that much, but I can travel a little. And maybe this guy has something to teach me and to teach us, not just about making money. That's sort of how people think of him. He was much more complex than that. So it was, like all my books, a real hybrid work. I mean, part biography of Ben Franklin, part history of the time period, the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, part travelogue, because I travel in his footsteps. He lived in London and Paris. He spent more than a third of his life overseas. He was sort of like me, drawn to the foreign. And it was part really self-help book. What life lessons can we learn from this man? So, So I keep saying I'm going to write a small book, a simple book, on a simple subject. But I keep, for whatever reason, they all are on big, huge topics. And my wife says I should just write a book that takes me 3 months to write, and be better for our finances, because my projects take years. And but that's just the way I am, I guess.
Right. I mean, it's always difficult to come up with the biographical kind of work, to, bring it to life. I also had an opportunity to interview, Kai Bird, and he was talking about biographies and
who lived in Kathmandu, I believe. For
absolutely,
a while.
Absolutely,
and who has gone on to great success with, I believe it was the Pulitzer Prize and the Oppenheimer book. And he's written others, I know, but the Oppenheimer book became a huge movie as well. So I don't know Kai Bird personally, but I certainly admire his work. And so I see that you're able to just interview a lot of, maybe not all your guests have an interest or an overlap with Nepal, but there seems to be a connection there, right?
Right. Yeah. So, Eric, what's been the most surprising lessons that you have learned from the people and places you have written about?
It's funny. I meet all these fascinating people around the world, and I hear lots of stories, lots of bits of wisdom, but some stick in your mind more than others. It seems that as much as I do teach writing, and we can talk about that, and I tell my students always write things down. Never assume you'll remember it, which is true. Those details you've got to record. But the big stuff, the important stuff, sticks with you. And one story was and geez, they're all from Asia now that I think about it, but one was from Thailand. I was working on the geography of bliss, and I was talking to a Thai school teacher in Bangkok, and he told me a story about his neighbor and the banana tree. It'll just take a minute, so bear with me. So he's
Sure.
he's got this house sort of on the outskirts of Bangkok, and it's very green, and there are lots of plants growing. And his neighbor had this big banana tree, and the leaves were falling into the teacher's yard, and they were bringing insects with them and causing problems. So now, typically, I think as an American would solve this problem by banging on the neighbor's door and saying, your banana tree's in my yard, you got to cut it, do something about it. But that's not what this Thai teacher did. He just snipped a little piece of the banana tree every day, and then another piece another day. And eventually his neighbor got the message, brought in his gardener, and solved the problem. Well, I said to the school teacher, why didn't you just confront your neighbor directly? He said, no, I've got to live with him. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, the relationship is more important than the problem. The relationship is more important than the problem. And I often find myself going back to that, when I'm in a difficult conflict with someone I like, someone I have to live with, my wife, friends, whoever, and I want to be truthful, right? In America, we're big on telling it like it is, as we say. But I remind myself that the relationship is more important than the problem. And I think there's great wisdom in that. That doesn't mean that you're not trying to solve the problem. That doesn't mean that you might be right and the person you're in conflict with might be wrong, or vice versa. It just reminds us that the relationship is what matters. That's what's going to persevere long after the problem is solved or not solved. That's one thing that's stuck in my mind. Another was in Bhutan, actually, in Thimphu, the capital. I was talking to a man named Karma. I figured I must have done something in a past life if I met a man named Karma, right? So that was a happy circumstance. And he was involved in the country's policy of gross national happiness. So we're talking about happiness. And I guess I had used the phrase personal happiness once or twice with him. And he stopped me and he said, Eric, what is this phrase personal happiness you're using? There is no such thing as personal happiness. Happiness is 100% relational. Getting back to relational. And at first I thought he was exaggerating 100%. What about, creativity and all these other aspects of a happy life? But as I researched the book and lived my life, I began to realize that Karma meant exactly what he said. Happiness is 100% relational. It's based on the quality and to some extent the quantity of our relationships with others. It's not personal. You can't work on your personal happiness the way you work on your personal physique alone in the gym, the fitness center.
Right.
You've got to, have connections with other people. And those are just two examples of sort of the little nuggets of wisdom that have stuck with me over the years.
No, very profound. Relationship is more important than the problem. It stuck to
True.
my head as well, Eric.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for travelers who want to move beyond sightseeing to something more transformative?
Number one, slow down would be my first piece of advice. Slow down. We rush through these sites so they become a blur. And, 100 years ago, you couldn't really rush through Asia or Europe. You can move as fast as a train or a carriage, and life moved at a slower pace. Now we have to consciously, intentionally slow ourselves down. I will calculate how much time I think I need in a place, say, like Kathmandu or Pokhara, and then I will add 25%. Always add at least 25%. And I've never regretted it, right? And I like to have time to linger and to loiter. The other piece of advice may sound a bit odd, but stay with me, is to travel alone. I think if you travel in a group, even a group of two, you're sort of you're insulating yourself from what's around you. You're less approachable if you're in a group or a couple. You're less likely to really see and observe what's around you because you're focused on engaging with the others in your group. So especially when I'm traveling on an assignment or working on a book, I do travel alone. because it just makes me more susceptible to my surroundings, more aware of my surroundings. The other advice may sound a bit strange too, and that is to not over-prepare for a trip. By that, I mean, there's so much information online now and in books about, a place. And if a person would say going to Kathmandu for the first time, I would say yes, read a history of Nepal or of the city, definitely, because we cannot travel back in time yet. So you'll want to know the history. But it's going to sound funny coming from a travel writer, but don't read too many travel writers about it, because you want to have a fresh perspective. Don't read too many TripAdvisor reviews of the hotel. I mean, once you've made your decision, go experience it yourself.
True.
Everything is mediated through others' opinions. So those are 3 pieces of travel advice.
Right. And is there any place you haven't written about yet that you feel might reveal another layer of human wisdom?
Well, that's a good question. I've reached the age where I'm actually less interested in going to new places as I am in returning to old places and mining them for more wisdom. Like we talked about, I return to Kathmandu at least once a year, and always to at least staying in the same part of the city in Bodhanath, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which I love because it's a little world unto itself. Of course, it used to be a separate village, right? A few decades ago, there was Kathmandu and there was Bodhanath, this sort of Tibetan enclave. Now it's merged into greater Kathmandu sprawl, but it still feels like its own world. And I like to go back and see what's changed, what hasn't changed. Is there some place that I'm really dying to visit that I think contains this wisdom? I mean, to be honest, I cannot think of anything off the top of my head. I have friends, one woman in particular, who has visited 203 countries, which is amazing because there are only 193 countries, but she added extra territories. And she's been literally to every country in the world plus extras. And I don't, I'm well traveled, but I don't have a desire to do that. I'd rather go back to Nepal, go back to India, experience it again fresh. There's so much there still that, why go to a new place when, I haven't been to Mustang in Nepal. Right. I'd like to go there. So just one example.
Wow. That's a fabulous place. You should visit.
You've been?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I want to go there.
Yeah. And Eric, my last question for today's program is, looking back across your career from journalism to best-selling books, what's the one thread that you think that has tied all your work together?
I think that's fairly easy. I hope I'm giving the right answer. I think it's easy. Always be careful when you think an answer's easy, because you might be fooling yourself. I think it's that place matters, that where we are shapes who we are, that we are, I am, Eric, and I've traveled the world, but I am American, and I do see the world through American glasses. Hopefully I can take those glasses off sometimes and see the world through Nepalese or Indian glasses. And Sumit, you're clearly well-read and I'm sure well-traveled, but you're still Nepali, right? Born in Nepal, and you're going to see the world through Nepali glasses, and I think that's good. So even in this age of digital technology, here we are talking thousands of miles away via Zoom, I still think that place matters, and I think people are hungry for that, to reestablish that connection with where they are. And I'm working on a new book project is about places that inspire wonder and awe, and about what are known as thin places. Now, thin places, it's an old Celtic or Irish term, and it means places where the veil or the line between this world and the other world, however you define the other world, is thin. and you feel something transcendent. The stupa in Bodhanath, I think, is an example of a thin place. People were drawn to it. People feel different there. You can call it energy, whatever you want. So that's what my new book is about. And I'm really, diving deep into this concept of place and the power of place. So, yeah, if there's something that connects them, it's the power of place. Even the book about Ben Franklin, he was shaped by place throughout his life. Had he been born in London instead of Boston, we wouldn't know the name Ben Franklin. He was born in the right place at the right time for him. Seriously, where he could really blossom. So, yeah, in 2 words, place matters.
Absolutely, Eric. Place matters. And on that note, I really would like to thank you for your time. It's really a privilege to be talking with you. And it's my honor to have you in my platform. Thank you so much once again.
Dhanyavad, Sumit. I enjoyed it.